Hello, I'm Daedalus with Nerds and Stuff, and today I'll be taking this Dark Angels Primaris Lieutenant from this to this. Let's get started. So if you've ever painted a Games Workshop model before, you probably know that they are a hell of a lot easier to do in pieces. So I kind of blue tacked the Marine together, and now he's separated out into his different bits. I have primed everything black except for his head. So to pull off this technique, we're actually going to be using the airbrush today. And there's that white primed head. We won't be airbrushing that bit. This technique was actually pioneered by a guy named Grant Stacy. I ran into him on the Dark Angels Facebook group, actually. He posted some stuff and then was kind enough to help walk me through it. So this is all his creation. I have just built upon what he made with this wonderful paint scheme and kind of put the little Daedalus twist to it, but all the credit for this goes back to him. He's really a great guy. So we're just hitting everything with an even black coat just to make sure that I didn't miss any spots when I was priming, or to make sure that I've got uniform coverage in the event that maybe my primer didn't quite get it like in all the joints. My can was getting kind of low. I need to go buy a new one, so this is just covering my bases. This technique, we're actually going to be building up layers of metallics before we even apply any kind of green. So we're going to be stepping into that next with some Vallejo black metal. That's what's going on right now. It is really dark, really dark, but it has just a little bit of metal pigment to it, and it's just kind of going to establish this black undercolor that we're going to build up from and hopefully make something that looks really good. So throughout this model today, we're just going to kind of be playing round robin with all the different pieces, just making sure we can get all the paints on all the right places on every one. And I will apologize in advance, there are some moments where the pieces on the individual bits that are not attached to the main model do wander a little bit. And when I'm doing fine details, they do kind of do a little bit of spinning too, so hopefully everybody stays with us and it doesn't make anybody too sick. But I just want to warn you guys before we get too far in. So I'm still just laying down that base coat all the way across the model, getting all these pieces, everything I want to be this black metal, so that I can build up from there. Because if I have this black metal as my primary shadow, once I get the clear green on it, it'll still look really good. It's going to be super dark in these shadow spots, but it'll look great. So now that I've got this black metal undercoat done, we need to do some highlights. And for that, we're just going to do a real zenithal highlight coming down from above, and we're going to use gunmetal for that. This is Vallejo Game Air gunmetal, and when Grant did his, he mixed his gunmetal and his black. I tend to like my Marines a little bit brighter for the Dark Angels, so he recommends a 50-50. I just went straight gunmetal here, because I thought that was brighter, and I like the green so much I wanted to see more of it. So we're just coming down from zenithal and then hitting a few spots that I feel need a little more detailed highlight that maybe didn't get picked up in a zenithal, like kind of the backs of the calves on the power armor, or making sure the arms are done well. Ideally, I'm trying to match all the different highlights across the different pieces, even though they're technically not assembled, which can be kind of tricky. I know it's really hard to see, but I promise there are highlights going on. So now that we're pretty much done with this, we're going to kick back over and we're just going to do some brush work for a bit. So now we're switching over and we're going to be painting in all the highlights now. So this is kind of like a pre-shading technique. You kind of do all your under highlights and then hit it with a real thin overcoat, and that builds everything up. So real quick, we're going to hop over and do our Space Marine helmet real quick, our head. It's not technically a helmet because his helmet's on his belt, but we don't want him to be neglected, and I got the paints on my palette, so we want to kind of make sure we're doing everything in sequence so that this green will show up the same all the way across the model. The last thing you want is to have like mismatched pieces, like the green on the arms don't match the green on the or like the headpiece don't match the green on the shoulders, because then it's really noticeable and it doesn't look good. So just like before, we're coming in and just hitting these parts that are, as best as I could tell, these are the parts that would still be metal. They would be like the same armor color, because it looked to me like they were all the parts of a helmet minus like the face mask and head cover. So that's kind of what I went with, and I figured it would give a nice contrast to the rest of the face too. So we're just hitting that with black real quick, and then we're going to follow it up with the black metal. We're doing the exact same sequence as before. So now we're coming in with the black metal, And then we'll hit Gunmetal highlight in a few sections. And kind of doing this real precise work, it is so much easier to do these faces when you can hold them like this. Like, I've painted faces on a lot of models, and I can honestly tell you, I hate doing it. I really hate doing faces, because they're so hard to hold, and they're hard to get at, and, you know, you have so little control because it's far away. They're just really hard. But being able to hold them separate like this makes the process a lot easier. So now we're just hitting with that Gunmetal highlight, just hitting about the top portion. There's not going to be a whole lot of structured highlight on a piece like this because so much of it is just kind of getting the real fringe light coming down, but it will still stand out. So now we're coming through and doing these brush highlights with Gunmetal. Now I'm just hitting kind of the primary facing surfaces, establishing your highlights like you would on a normal marine. So like I'm picking out the, what would you call this? The armor trim. Yeah, that's what you'd call that. I'm getting all of the armor trim in this because I really like when the trim on the shoulder pads pop. And I'm getting a real fine line on the inside too, so you can kind of have that dark barrier between the armor trim and then the rest of the shoulder pad, so it kind of gives it more depth. It looks like that trim really stands out. Just getting the fingers just in case they happen to actually be seen. And just getting a few of those inner edges too. Now, I didn't know how much of this would actually be truly visible. I mean, sure, I'd done test fits and I've got like the model in front of me, but I didn't know how much would be a part of the model that just doesn't normally catch the eye. You know, the inside edges on arms like that tend to be facing downward typically. You can sometimes get a good look at them, but for the most part, they're just out of the way. And there was kind of a side-by-side so you could see, hopefully, some highlights on the metal shoulders. Coming back through with more and just getting the other side now, exactly the same as before. Just getting the trim, doing that inner line, picking out some spots on the arm that are, we'll say, armor details I really want to stand to show difference between the pieces. And that's pretty much it on these guys. Not a whole lot going on. Just getting those few spots. And fingers, of course, because this one I know would be pointing up in the air. You'll see me a couple of times, I keep holding the model so that the sling has kind of the natural drop. That was a real great indicator for me of where like the light was going to hit, because I can see like how that sling would naturally be stopping. If you can imagine it like that, like if you had a sling on a rifle like that and you were holding it up, that's the natural shape it would take with gravity. And that's kind of what I went for. Well, at least to pick my highlights. I was doing it the easy way. I could have just slapped it next to the model and seen for sure. Now on my backpacks, I always like to do the inner edges of stuff like that because they're exhaust vents, that's true. There's not a whole lot going on out of those, but I think when you have that bright lip done, it makes them stand out more. And, you know, I'm not a huge fan of the real Dark Angels kind of Tron style that's we'll say, the studio scheme. But I do like having armor accents that stand out. Somebody took a lot of time sculpting these. They look really good. And some pieces like that, I just want to be seen. So I'll give them a little extra detail, like the bits of the grate there and kind of in between some of these edges. They're not necessarily the greatest highlight points or the most sharp edges or places that are easy to get at, but I think when you do those little details, you really see the dividends in the end. So now I'm just doing a little bit of accent work in a few spots, trying to basically paint in where the light hits, so that I can be sure the backpack stays nice and bright, since that's kind of a huge focal point, especially when you're actually playing a game. That's all you see is the backpacks. Switching back over to the main model now, we're just doing the exact same thing. We still have gunmetal on the brush, keep loading it back up and just hitting these light edges. Putting the black metal on really lets it stand out so you can see what's going on with your painting lamps and stuff. You can really pick out the highlights easy because they're all just right there. So I'm just getting bits like the helmet and kind of his shoulders. I like to do the armor trim on kind of the back groin plate, the butt plate, because I like to have those stand out, even though they're usually almost always in a shadow spot. I like having that little accent on the plate, you know? Maybe it's more like a wear than a true light hitting it type situation. I mean, Space Marine's gotta sit too once in a while, right? That's gonna cause that to break. or down. Maybe the paint color is going to wear a little bit. It's going to be a little bit brighter, a little bit newer. I mean, there's not going to be many bullet wounds in the ass. That's, Dark Angels don't retreat. So that's not going to happen. It's really important when doing a technique like this to get all the highlights you want when you're doing the pre-shading. Because once you get that coat on, it's going to be impossible to come back through and shade stuff. If you have a highlight you missed, it's going to be really hard to come back through and have a uniform green tone, especially if there are any accidental spots where you need to do touch-up work. You really, really hope that you don't run into those, because you won't get that same level of uniform color that you will across the rest of the armor. It's really hard to do, and I've run into that a few times. I've done some other test models and kind of airbrushing privately that hasn't gone on the channel, and it's the same thing. Once you get that done, you just have to be really careful. So I'm going through and being really thorough with all my highlights, trying to make sure I get all these armor plates. If this was just a regular Intercessor Grunt or maybe a Hellblaster, I probably wouldn't be going so heavy duty, but because it is a Lieutenant and therefore like a solo piece if you came from War Machine like I did, it's a piece that's going to see a lot more attention. It's going to be focused on by your enemies at the table. They're going to want to take it out because it's a support piece. It does more things. It comes on a bigger base, so it's a little more important. Therefore, I'm going to put a little more time into it to make it look really good, kind of give it the old heroic paint job. Because ideally they're not going to die as often, but if they do, they should look great doing it. So now that we're done with Gunmetal, we're just stepping straight into Chainmail Silver now. So this is a real bright silver. I'm doing just the fine edge highlights. This gets really green really fast with this technique. So you want to be very, very selective with where you do this. I am mostly just doing real fine edge highlights because it will really pop. I'm getting I did go a little heavy on the tops of the knee pads because those are just real sharp blades kind of. Other than that, it's just real fine work because it is what you'll see when we get there. I know I hate saying that when doing a tutorial video oh, you'll see at the end. Just stick around, you'll see. But it really does get really bright, and if you do too much, it can ruin your model. One of the test models I did before filming this, I stepped it up too much because I thought it would be too dark. And one of the things with miniature painting is that contrast is a good thing. It's your friend. Sharp contrast makes a model look more interesting on the table. Especially because you're usually not looking at these things from 8 inches away, you're looking from 3 feet. So bright contrast really makes it pop, it makes you look closely, because it catches your eye. This was too bright. When I did this before, I made it was pretty much one paint up. I base coated with the black metal, and then I pretty much did everything with a second base coat with the gunmetal, and then I started doing my chainmail silver for highlights, and I did a zenithal highlight with a 50-50 chainmail and gunmetal, and it was just way too bright. I ended up highlighting my fine edge highlights like I'm doing right now with chainmail silver with the Game Air silver, the true silver, and those were just like salamander green. They were really bright. I know a great scheme for salamanders now, and I hopefully will get around to painting some. So now we're just going to do some silver highlights, the chainmail silver on the face real quick. Just getting those few top-facing edges and maybe the interesting bits like his kind of selector, I don't even know what they are, little ports on the back of his helmet maybe, oxygen, who knows. Who knows? And then coming through on the backpack as well and hitting some of those fine edges. I like to get these vents with a sharp highlight because there's not a lot of accent work on the back of a backpack like this that you can do without it looking odd. So I really like to hit some of those strange pieces. Like you can trace on a standard Space Marine backpack, they've got a whole bunch of overlapping layers of kind of different plates. You can trace those if you want, but they are really hard to do on an edge highlight because the edge is so fine. You're dealing with like a 1 or 2 millimeter edge, and it's hard to get the brush in to do an edge highlight without dragging it across the rest. So I tend not to do those, and I try to just do the more extreme ones and hope that if I do a wash or something, it'll help darken those and make that a little more of a highlight, because I just can't manage to do it. My hands aren't steady enough, to get that fine of an edge and that little of a differential. So once again, we are just getting a few accent pieces. Just the brightest of the bright. The things that would only be in the most direct sunlight, because this is like literally your brightest highlight. This is your extreme highlight. So I'm getting the edges of the armor pieces. I like to do kind of a wedge on the corners of the shoulder pads like that, because it gives real fine definition for where the arms are and kind of where they're pointing. Picking out a few pieces on the armor plates, the shoulder pads, his little Buzz Lightyear computer, fingers. I mean, just the usual spots you'd put an extreme highlight. Nothing out of the ordinary. I guess they kind of look more like Iron Warriors right now. You know, it just occurs to me, you could probably make a pretty cool paint scheme if you took that real bright silver and you did the Space Marine emblem right up there on the shoulder pad, the Dark Angels kind of bladed wing, and if you did it with that silver, it would be super bright. It might look pretty cool for like a successor chapter. I should probably also mention, as you've probably noticed, and I forgot to mention, those are not your regular Primaris shoulder pads. They're the normal shoulder pads, but that is not a chapter symbol that comes with them or anything. I got those from a 3D printer guy. He's got a store and he does a whole bunch of stuff, and I don't know if I should specifically name him because these are technically almost copyright infringements, but I'm sure if you do some searching you could find some yourself. They are really handy, and they look really good too, especially all painted up. So if you notice, I'm taking this chainmail silver and I'm going back over those mid-shoulder highlights that I did, the inner lip. Probably not necessary, but I noticed on the top portion where the light was most direct and kind of it got the true zenithal highlight, that it got kind of too silvery. You couldn't really make that distinction. So I just wanted to make sure you could have that line all the way across. Now I'm just kind of doing a test fit to make sure my highlights are good and that I didn't miss anything. I guess it's not a fit. But now's the moment of truth. Now we're going to take some Tamiya Clear Green and we're going to apply it. Now this is Tamiya Clear Green and it is thinned a lot. Like, we're about 1-to-1 with the Tamiya thinner. Weird things happen when you thin these Tamiya paints with water. They form some kind of like chemical reaction and they get really blobby and tacky. So don't thin with water. I would really recommend getting the Tamiya thinner. I know it's expensive, but with this stuff you don't have a whole lot of room for error. So you can see it going down. It doesn't have the best kind of visibility. You can see some green tint starting to appear. It is a really thin coat, and like I said, this stuff is thinned a lot going through the airbrush. So there's not going to be a whole lot of paint being deposited too fast, but you're starting to see the green tinge show up. Unfortunately, this is just a paint scheme that isn't going to show up too well on camera. You will be able to see it, especially once I get the kind of the greens all the way done, but if you're doing it yourself, you'll be surprised at how much different it looks. The camera just doesn't do it any justice. I couldn't find a good way to light it to be able to take good pictures. To really showcase how awesome these look in person. So this is a really cool technique. You really should try it. I'd really recommend it because it looks cool, and so few people have done something like this. You'll really stand out at the table, especially if like you're at a tournament or something, or you have a lot of other players that play Dark Angels. This is a very unique paint scheme while still being very true to a Dark Angels studio look. So now I'm literally pulling right out of the airbrush pot for this to paint right on, so it's the same consistency, same thinness, and ideally should have the same sort of paint distribution going onto the helmet. So this is, like I said before, you want to have that consistency across your different pieces, because you don't want it to look like you maybe painted it separate. Like, it'll really impress other people if they think you painted it all as one chunk and you're able to get a brush in there to do stuff like painting the underside of his chin right and stuff. You'll really impress your friends or other people. They'll think you're just an amazing painter until they realize this is what everybody does. I hope. I know there are people that don't. They do full assemble and then paint afterwards, and I don't know how they do it. I did one Marine that way and it was just so hard. So now we're just getting the main torso. and just laying down the green, I think you can start to see it show up. You're definitely getting away from that silverish look. You're still going to maintain the metallic sheen, though. That's kind of what you're after. You want to get a green tint to all of it, but you don't want to cover it up. That's why you're using this Tamiya clear paint. The clear paints, if you apply them thin, will still show a lot of what's underneath. And that's why they're so great for something like this, because you are doing the pre-shading. You don't have to do this with like a normal acrylic paint like you would use in a dropper and then thin it all to hell. It's pretty much most of the way there. It's meant to have that diluted pigment concentration. So now I'm just, I did the shoulder, and I want to really make sure I've got the same green going across the top. That'll be the most noticeable spot because those are also the brightest highlights. So I want to make sure my greens look the same. Even though we're going separate pieces, the closer you can get them, the less noticeable it will be that you did them separately. If you don't get the greens right, or like if you do a whole batch of torsos and then you switched over and did a whole batch of arms, and you didn't really compare arms to specific torsos, you may run into a situation where your greens don't match and then it looks like you got the wrong guy's arms in the wrong place. So now we're just going to get into some of these, the fine stuff now. We got the armor base coat done. Just like that. This is Grant's really cool technique, and then from here it's just doing the fine detail painting on all the rest of the bits. But the armor color is done. So I'm going to be applying more metallic paint again. So you probably don't need to come back through with the black to reestablish your metallic pigment. I did because I had a lot of green bleed. You can kind of see it on top of the bolter pistol there. I had a lot of this bleed, and I didn't want that to potentially impact the metal I was going to put down, because I'm picky like that, and I like my colors to be exactly how I want them coming out of the bottle. But another benefit of doing this break apart is that you can get these shoulder joints. A lot of people don't end up painting these kind of the mesh joints at the elbows and shoulders and knees and legs and stuff, because they just can't see them, or they don't get to them. I guess it could also be because they don't care, but a little thing like that, even just painting them black, can really make them stand out. Then just getting a little bit on that slider too, and I'll be going through and getting black on all the metal pieces before I start painting the metal. You know, I try to do that so that I can keep the paints as fresh as I can on my palette, and so I don't have to do a whole lot of brush rinsing going back and forth. Kind of a lazy painter, but my laziness is efficiency. We'll call it efficiency. Yeah, that's a better word for it. So now we're just hitting this master-crafted Stalker bolt rifle. At least I assume this is the Stalker, because I think the Auto's got the snub. Actually, I'm not sure, because they don't have the same rifles on the Lieutenants as they do on the Intercessors. Even though in like the loadout kits in the Codex, they do have the same options. You can take the auto rifle or kind of the long-range Stalker. You know, I'm not sure. If you know, let me know in the comments, because I'm stumped. It also has a larger magazine, so I just have no idea. But we're just getting these black pieces all taken care of. If you wanted to, you could even leave your decorative panels on your weapons green. That could look cool too. I know a lot of people don't really care for the Christmas Marine style. It doesn't really bother me though. I don't see them as Christmas Marines, and maybe that's because I tend to paint a little bit more fluff stuff on the front of my weapon casings, because I don't like them all just being the same bright red. But I don't get a Christmas vibe. I mean, yeah, they're red and green, but it's not like they all have, you know, fur coats with fuzzy balls on the end of them or something. I mean, unless we just had a real scuffle with the Space Wolves and took some trophies. But anyway, here are those the armor joints I was talking about. They've got real big ones across the backs of the knees. Those are pretty easy to hit. And they've also got one on the hip there, and then a couple up underneath. Now, I'm not saying it's all that essential to get the ones up underneath, because ideally when you get it all based, nobody's going to be looking at this Primaris Lieutenant's crotch, but you never know. It pays to be thorough. So we've got those in place, and we'll come back and highlight those later so that we can get the ribbing to kind of really stand out. And I decided for my Primaris Lieutenants, because the kind of the paint scheme for the Space Marine one, or the Ultramarine ones, have got a big red stripe going right down the middle for their their kind of leadership. I decided I'd do something similar on mine. That way it just helps them stand out a little bit more from the rest of the intercessors on the table, because otherwise they do look pretty close. I know when I was assembling them, I actually thought this was like a unit leader, like kind of the one head honcho looking guy that every squad has that kind of stands out a little bit. I didn't realize he was actually a completely different piece. So now we're coming across with some XV88, just straight from the pot. It's kind of thinned a little bit by my wet palette, but I'm just hitting all the leather pieces. I like to use this as my base coat for the leather because it is such a nice brown, and it covers really well. It's one of the base colors from the Citadel line, and so it has great pigment concentration. Now, it can get you in trouble and be a little too thick at times, but as long as you're careful with it and don't lay on coats too thick, I don't think you'll have any problems. So just picking out the belt, and these are little details that really make the Marine pop. And I also hit all of my gold pieces I'll be doing in the future with this brown, and all of my bone-colored pieces. So I'm a fan of the bone-colored wings on the breastplates to kind of help signify the inner circle iconology in tune with the rest of the Dark Angels. That, and it's kind of part of their primary scheme, is just the dark green, bone, and red. So a little bit of integration there on the chest, and I don't know, I've seen gold done on them and done fairly well, but I don't want the chest piece to be a huge accent. I want it to be present, but I don't want it to be the primary thing you look at. You know, I don't want you to see this guy and be like, oh, hey, bright, shiny chest. No, I want you to look at, like, the pretty cool base I have planned for him, or, you know, the cool armor color we've done, thanks to Grant again. You know, I want to see those things. I don't want to see brass paint, or gold paint, if that's your choice instead of the brass. So a lot of leather bits here. He's got a couple of belt pouches. He's got this this lovely decorative piece here with like a skull and a lock. Not quite sure what's going on with that. And then he's got a grenade too. And I missed the grenade when I was coming through with black, so I'm going to have to go back and redo that one. But I honestly thought it was a belt pouch until I got close with the XV88 and found out it was not. But that's okay, because it's not like we're going far. We're just going straight to the pallet. So now we're going to hit the leather strap on the potentially Stalker autocannon rifle. The Master crafted something, just to have kind of uniform leather across all my different pieces. I like my tones to match. I don't know where they get their leather. I don't know if they use leather or if they just have some sort of synthetic material in the 40k or the 40,000th millennium. I don't have the answers to those questions, unfortunately. So now we're coming back with the gold, and I like to hit their gold belt buckle because it's a really small piece that can give some accents. And I decided to do the outer casing of this decorative thing in gold too. And I wanted it to be all the way gold cast and then have some silver accents. So I even got the skull on the inside too, but I left the lock because I definitely wanted the lock to be silver. So now we're going to take a little bit of silver and we're going to hit that lock and kind of the outsides of his belt buckle. Now if you look real close, his belt buckle kind of has, you've got the leather strap coming across, and then you've got a little kind of piece, and then the big squared off oval type thing on the front. It was those little pieces I decided were kind of a metal clip, and so I wanted to hit those, and now we're coming back through with the black and getting that grenade. We'll get that decorated appropriately before moving on. And like I said before, we want to be very careful not to mess up this base coat of the armor, because it will be really, really hard to fix anything if we do make those sorts of mistakes, if we get hit with a lazy brush or something. So now we're just going to take a little bit of leather brown. This is a lighter brown to XV88, it's a Reaper line, and we're just going to hit the edge accents with it. And I decided I'd do a little bit of kind of custom detailing on the holster too, because otherwise you just have this big flat panel. But we're just going to hit these edges so that we have like some sort of wear type stuff going on, like it looks darker further away from the edges, because it's just, those are the spots that don't get rubbed. You know, it's darker in the middle parts because that's just kind of where the leather can be protected. If you're gonna like bang something that's attached to your hip on something else, it's probably gonna happen at one of the side points. So just hitting the top of the belt too with another edge highlight, just so it stands out a little bit more. Usually when I do a wash on these belts though, they stand out plenty fine on their own, but every little bit helps. You know, and it might make the belt look a little more worn, a little more aged. This guy, in his face, he does have 2 service studs, so, and he's a captain. Excuse me, he's not a captain, he's a lieutenant. He hasn't got there yet. Can't be too ambitious. But he does have 2 service studs, which is weird because I thought all these Primaris guys had been stuck on Mars for the last millennia, the last 1,000 years or so. So I'm not sure. I guess maybe there was something that happened on Terra or Mars. Or I guess this could be one of the ones that went the procedure to become a Primaris Marine. Who knows? It's just sculpting. So I actually just took the leather brown and I mixed it with a little bit of the black that was on the palette to make this light gray that I'm using to do the highlighting here. It's just kind of a mucky, like, just a mucky gray. That's all it is, a dirty gray. But I figured, why bother busting out the other paint, right? I mean, I've already got this here. I can mix something up. So now we're going to hit that bone color. So this is just creamy ivory. I have kind of a recipe I use for Dark Angels Brown, which is this XV, or the Dark Angels Bone, excuse me. It's this XV88 with, it's black, then XV88, then creamy ivory, and washed down with Agrax Earthshade. That's kind of my recipe to do the Dark Angels Bone color. And you can kind of see that I've done a thumbnail tutorial and I did the Terminator paintings too for the Deathwing model. Hopefully having some more of that soon. I got a box of Knights sitting there on my shelf waiting to be painted. So it was at this point that I remembered that these guys need a chapter symbol on that knee. I'd completely forgotten. I had planned to put them in the 4th company of the Dark Angels because I remember reading somewhere that like the 4th company was nearly completely destroyed on Cadia. There was some sort of incident with a chaos insurgents, demons in business, and most of the 4th company was destroyed, so I figured this would be an ideal one to have reinforcements show up for. Now, a little problem with that is painting the 4th company symbol is really hard. So it's really fluffy, I'll like it, but I'm struggling. I will probably struggle with the rest of these to paint the 4th company symbol that cleanly. It's the one with the bone under, and then the white and black checkerboard on the top half. It's not very painter friendly because it's all freehand. So then I also have a different recipe for my purity seals, and that's just the same as the bone kind of, but instead of using the creamy ivory, I actually have a Reaper paint called Aged Bone that is a lot grayer. So when it gets hit with the Agrax, it tends to stay a little bit whiter, looks more like dried parchment. And there I'm just doing the bone strip on the helmet too. So just trying to get all of that done, and I want to be really careful doing the helmet because if the paint goes on too thick, which white notoriously does, it will really be visible on that smooth helmet surface. So I've watered it down, and I'm really being careful to make sure I don't get any brush strokes or any of that chalky texture that shows up with white sometimes. And it's going to take more coats, but I would rather do more coats and get what I'm after than have fewer coats, but potentially trouble. Because that chalky texture never goes away. It will haunt you through all the rest of the model, because you'll keep seeing it, and every time you put on a wash or something, it will be there and you'll see the chalk. I have had models I've been trying to paint ruin because of that chalky white texture. Now, that's mostly because I'm a perfectionist, but anyways. We're just applying some Agrax Earthshade now. It's coming straight out of the pot, and I'm just putting this on all the leather bits and the bone bits. And I guess that parchment too down on his calf there. And this will give them that shading and give them that depth so they look really good, and so I get the color tone right on my bone. While I'm applying the rest of this kind of wash to the bone pieces and the leather, I just want to take a moment to thank all of our Patreon backers. You guys really are great, and, you know, it's thanks to you guys that videos like this are possible. So thank you very much. If you'd like to become one, check us out at patreon.com/nerdsandstuff. We'd love to have you along for the journey. We're just getting the last of the leather bits on the bolt rifle there, and then we're just going to do one last go on the helmet, and that's going to pretty much do it for this video. If you have any questions or comments, just leave them below. If you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, please do so you'll be notified when additional content comes out. And as always, until next time, happy painting.